Hello and welcome to lesson 3 in our Programming with Python series. So it is a very rainy, cold, miserable day outside, so I'm not sure if you can hear that on the video, but it is raining quite heavily outside, so any odd sound effects, that's what you're hearing. So today's lesson is really going to be about going over some of the material we've covered before and a few new things, and just making sure everything's clear and easy before we move on to the kind of next round of lessons and material. Let's start with something we haven't really covered yet. Let's go over comments. So comments are just some text in the program that's not there for the computer. It's not there to be processed. Comments are there for people to read. And that might be yourself in a few months' time, so you remember why you've done what you've done in a program, or maybe for your teacher so they can see your train of thought, or for like professional purposes, other programmers can read your code and they can see what the important steps were, and you can explain why you're doing what you're doing. To do a code in Python, we just use the hash symbol. And if the computer sees the hash symbol, it ignores whatever comes after in that line. So here, this is a comment that is ignored by the computer. The computer just goes to the next line and carries out the instruction. So if you want to add a comment, you can just use the hash symbol and then write down what the code means. So what are the important points? Why are you doing it? Etc. So we don't put comments for every single line of code, but we do it for the big blocks of code, for things like subroutines, if statements, maybe for, while loops, when you're creating different classes of program, things that we're not really concerned about just now, but it is good if you start thinking about comments, and even if you're writing short programs, if you just start adding 1 or 2 comments just to get in the habit of doing it. So again, comments make it much easier to see what you have done when you come back to your program several months later. I'll leave that up for a moment, because what's going to happen is you're going to write more and more complicated programs. You're going to write programs that are 100, 200, 300 lines of code, and you're going to come back to it in 6 months and look at it and going, what does this do? Why did I do that? So comments will make it easier for you, trust me. So let's cover something that we've covered before, but let's maybe go into a little bit more detail about why we're doing what we're doing. So hopefully remember that a string is just a block of text. It could be a single word, a sentence, or an entire paragraph. Maya's kind of skipping ahead here, isn't it? So when we're programming in Python, we use str as a keyword to mean string. Same way that we use int to mean integer, or float to mean floating point, or bool for boolean. So you can have a look at the following code here. You can have a go at typing it in if you like, run it, see what happens. But let's kind of go through the logic. So we're going to have 3 pieces of text. We're going to have start, we're going to have name, and we're going to have end. Start has the value hello. Name will have the value for whatever is input by the user when the programming is running. And again, end is how are you today. So what happens when we run this program? What's going to happen? First of all, the first thing that's going to happen on screen is you're going to see this line here. Okay. So it's going to come up on the screen and say, what is your name? You'll type in your name, and that will be stored as name. And then the next thing that you're going to see on screen is it's going to print the final piece of text. And that is going to be comprised of hello, which is the first thing. And then whatever the value in name is, that's going to be the second thing. And then it's going to be whatever is stored in end, which is, of course, how are you today? This is the third thing. So it should say, hello, Bob, how are you today? Or hello, Susan, how are you today? So this is something that we have looked at before. It's just the idea that it's using plus here to join the three separate pieces of text, the three strings together. And I dropped my pen. A little bit clumsy today. So if you add strings together, of course, you end up with one long string, one long piece of text. The technical term for this is concatenation. So I've highlighted that in red. It's a nice word to know, nice word to use. It just means joining text together. And of course, Python understands that the plus symbol has a different meaning when you use text than when you use math. So it knows that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but it also knows that 2 plus 2 equals 2. And I'll show you an example of that again in a minute, because you've got an important distinction between this and this, whether you're using numbers or whether you're using text. We have looked at using int to convert a number entered as text into a number so we can use it when we're doing math. But we can also do the reverse and convert a number into a string, and we use that by using the keyword str and then putting whatever we want to convert in those brackets. So we could take, 76 and make that 76. Again, for the computer, a number and a text are very different. And sometimes we want it one way, and sometimes we want it in the other, depending on what we're trying to do with the data. So this is kind of a nice bit of code here because we're going to be doing a lot of converting. So again, take a look at it, try and work out what it does, pause the video, run it, see what happens, see if you can work out why it's doing what it's doing. Okay, I will take you through it. So here we've got a number, which is 2. And we're saying that we want to convert it. We want to typecast it and make it a string. So now 2 will be stored as number, but it's going to be stored as text. I've put inverted commas around it. It's not an integer, it's a piece of text. It's different. Next line, print 2 plus 2 equals, comma, number plus number. So 2 plus 2 equals will print out exactly as you see on screen. It'll say 2 plus 2 equals. And then we're saying number plus number. Well, remember, this is text. We've converted it to a string. So all it's going to do is print out 22 or 2. Because it's text, it's not going to do maths. It's going to do concatenation. So it's just going to put the 2 and the 2 next to each other and print it out. So this line will print out 2 plus 2 equals 22. The next line will do something different. Again, we've got this piece of text that's between the inverted commas. So it will be printed out exactly as you see, 2 plus 2 equals. Then we've got comma integer number plus integer number. Well, again, here we're typecasting. We are going to say, okay, take this piece of text and turn it into an integer. Convert whatever's in the brackets into an integer value. So we're going to convert it back into 2 and 2, no inverted commas. These are numbers now. And now the computer knows that it has to do math when it sees the plus. It's not concatenation. We're back to maths. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So on screen you will see 2 plus 2 equals 4. So why am I showing you this example? Why are we getting a number to a string and then back into a number again? It's just to make clear the difference between doing maths and concatenating strings. So if you've got 2 pieces of text and you use plus, we get concatenation. If you've got 2 numbers, integers or floating point, etc., and the computer sees a plus, it will do mathematics. So make sure you're using the right data in the right manner at the right time, okay? So to do a little bit of formatting, if you want to make your printouts, your outputs look a little bit more interesting, we can use this symbol here, the /n. And this depending on how you've learned programming, might have a different name. Sometimes it's called an escape character, escape literal, compiler directive. I've seen a few different terms floating around. But whenever the computer sees this /n, it knows it's got to take a new line. So it doesn't print it out. You're not going to see this on screen. It just makes the computer take a new line automatically. Okay, so that has a special meaning. There are lots of different special kind of escape characters like this, but just now the /n is useful because it lets you take a new line. So make sure you get it the right way. You don't want to say /n like this. That's not going to work. It's the other direction, of course. So when we see this printed, it's going to say, I got a feeling, new line, that tonight's going to be a good night, new line, that tonight's going to be a good night. And of course, we're printing out using concatenation to put all the text together into one long string. So again, run it, try it, write your own text, add a few new line characters, see what happens. Remember, we always learn best by experimenting and playing with the code. That's what you need to get in the habit of doing. It's okay if it doesn't work or it crashes or whatever. Just keep practicing and trying to get different things to happen. So this is when we go into a little bit more detail about combining strings and numbers. So combining strings together is fine, adding numbers together is fine, but often when we're using Python programs, we want to output something that is a mixture of text and a mixture of numbers all together. And there are different ways we can do this. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways and then maybe explain the differences. So it starts fairly familiar. Start equals 2 plus 2. This is text, of course, because it's in inverted commas. Number equals 4. So this is going to be stored as an int, an integer value, because it's just a plain number. And then print start, comma, number. Print 2 plus 2 equals number. So what's going to happen when we do this? Well, notice that we're using the comma to separate the values. When you see a comma, that means you're making Python do multiple prints. So this is like saying print start, print number. It prints whatever the start value is, it prints whatever the number value is. So for example, in the case of the first line, it's going to print 2 plus 2 equals, and it's going to print the number 4. So you're going to get 2 plus 2 equals 4. And you're also going to get the same in the second line, because of course this is the same as we had stored in the start value. It'll print whatever the text is, and then the comma means, okay, now we're going to do another print. So print this text, and then print the value held in this variable. So this is one way that we can print a mixture of text and numbers together in the same print statement, and this is by using a comma. So let's now take a look at another way of doing this. This time, we're going just to print one thing out, but we're going to use the plus symbol to concatenate lots of different pieces of text, variables, numbers together, and then print it out in one go. So that's a little bit different from the previous example where we're using comma to say, okay, print this, then print this, then print this, then print that, etc. Here, we're going to concatenate lots of different pieces of text together and then just do one print for everything. So let's just take a look at that, see if I can make that a bit more clear. So, okay, cost equals 14.99. Obviously, this is going to be a floating point. It's a number. Quantity equals 4. That's going to be an integer because it's just doesn't have any fraction. It's going to be an integer. And now we're going to say print, you have bought, plus to concatenate, quantity, plus elephants at, plus cost, plus each. So we're concatenating. We want to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things together here. Remember the plus here is for concatenation. Now remember, concatenation only works with text in Python, okay? So if I want quantity and cost, to be concatenated into my string, then I need to explicitly convert them into text before I can do the concatenation. So we have to do a bit of casting here. So I'm saying, okay, convert quantity into a string, convert cost into a string, so I can concatenate all this together. And then I can just print everything out in one go because it's just one big text. So again, you might want to try running this, play around with it a little bit, see what happens. So we've got two different ways of having a similar effect. They work in different ways. The effect is the same. So why? What's the difference? Well, if we go back, the first example, again, it's just like doing multiple prints. Because we've got the comma, we're printing one thing, and then we're printing the second thing. It's calling print twice, really. Here, we're only going to call print once, but only after we've joined everything together into one long piece of text. You can already see some differences, I am sure. So here, we don't need to typecast. When we have the comma here, we don't have to worry about typecasting. The computer will take care of that for us. Also, adding a comma means you get a space. So the comma actually adds a leading space into whatever you're printing out. Kind of a little interesting effect. Here, yeah, we need to typecast, we need to convert because we're concatenating, and we need to convert to string to do that in Python. And if we want spaces, then we have to add them. We have to add them ourselves. The computer won't do it. We have to add them manually. So there are differences. So in method 1, using commas, each item is printed separately. We don't need to typecast, but it's calling the print method, which is computationally more expensive. This means it is slower to run. So if you're adding a lot of items together, that will be significantly slower than the other method. Method 2, using concatenation with the plus sign, each item is combined into a single string and then printed. We've got to remember to typecast it because we can't just add numbers and concatenate that into text in Python. We have to explicitly convert it from a number into text. However, because we're only going to call the print method once after we concatenate everything, this is significantly less demanding computationally. It is much faster. So when I run my own kind of speed tests, if you're trying to print out 2 items, then method 2 is twice as quick, twice the speed. So that sounded a little bit confusing. So it took half the time of method 1. So yeah, twice as quick. If you were doing 4 items, method 2 was approximately 8 times faster. So it's almost n to the power of 2, where n is the number of items you're trying to output in a single print statement. So again, that's on my computer. Obviously, you're going to get maybe slightly different results, but method 2 is definitely faster. So for small programs, that doesn't really matter. But if you've got a very complicated program, then maybe method 2 would be better because it is going to execute faster and more efficiently. So concatenating everything into a single string and then doing one print is faster than using commas to do multiple kind of print statements together. So during my slides and my lessons, I kind of use a mixture. I think students often find method 1 just easier because you don't have to worry about typecasting. But if you're maybe more of an advanced student and you want to get in the habit of efficient programming, you might want to think about method 2. So remember, casting, I keep mentioning this term, but let's just go through it again. It just means changing the type of data you're working with. So we've used things like int and float and string, and we know that whatever we put inside the brackets gets converted to the data type. So either integer or float or string, etc. Python will automatically change the data type for you in certain circumstances. So maybe that's not what you want, so you've got to be careful sometimes. Okay, so here I'm going to say x is definitely going to be an integer, y is definitely going to be an integer, but what's going to happen to z? What's z going to print here? What do you think? Most people say, oh, it has to be an integer, because we're saying 22 an integer divided by 7 an integer, z is going to be an integer value. But it's not, because Python knows that x divided by y is not going to give you an integer value. It's going to give you a fraction, isn't it? So when you do division, you're often going to get fractions. You're going to get kind of floating point numbers. So z is actually going to be a floating point number. And when you run this, it's going to print 3 point, I don't know, something, 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 something. I can't do that in my head straight away. Some of you probably can. I can't. But you're going to get a floating point number. It's not just going to print 3 and chop off the fraction part. You are going to get the fraction. So when you do division, Python is going to make that a floating point because you've got this possibility of a fractional value. So if you really wanted z to be an integer, you'd have to be specific. So you could do something like, I don't know, here, you could have said, I don't know, int z. There we go when we print it. Or we could have done that here as well. We could have changed that. We could have said z equals int x divided by y. And that would also work. But again, only if you really wanted that to be an integer and then chop off any potential fractional values. So depending on what you want to do, maybe the computer automatically selecting this as a floating point is good, or maybe it's not. So you might have to go back and change the program and explicitly change the type of data. Okay, guys, we are going to do a bit of programming now. I'm going to give you a little programming task. Maybe give you some code to get started and then give you the answer. But you should really try programming it yourself before you check the answer, because it's good to get in the habit of having to think about things and putting everything together and even being stuck for a while and then overcoming that problem. So I'd like you to write a program that takes as input the number of minutes you've been in a lesson for, and then works out how many seconds that is and outputs as a string like this. You have been in this lesson for 2,400 seconds, for example. So remember to convert it using all the right typecasting, depending on how you want to take in the data and output the result. So if you're comfortable to get started, do it right now. If not, I'll give you some code to get started in just a second. So to get the value, something like length equals input. How many minutes have you been in this lesson for? And then we're going to calculate the answer, and then we're going to work out what the output is, and then we're going to print the output. So have a think. Try and add at least one comment. Get in the habit of doing that. And I'm going to count silently to 500. No, just a couple of seconds, and then I'm going to go and give you the answer. So you can see here I've said calculate equals int length times 60. So I'll take in the number of minutes, multiply it by seconds to get multiplied by 60 to give you the number of seconds. Notice that I'm converting it to an int here. Don't have to do that. I could have done it here. I could have said int input close brackets. I could have converted it here, but just to give you something different, I'm converting it here. Again, it doesn't matter when you do it, as long as you do it before you do the math, okay? Otherwise, if you haven't converted it to an integer either here or here, this isn't going to really give you the answer that you're expecting. And then the output, you have been in this lesson for, then we're going to concatenate with calculate after we convert it to a string, and then we're going to concatenate that with seconds. So we're going to have 3 strings, put them together in one piece of text, which we're going to call output, and then we're going to print it all together. So that's just how I've chosen to do it. You might have chosen to do it in a different way. As long as you get the right answer, then your code is correct. But again, I'm just showing you one particular way. If you want an extension, you could add to this by, for example, calculating how much time is left in the lesson and outputting that as a number of seconds. I'm not going to give you the solution. That's just an extra programming challenge if you're looking for a bit more work to do with this particular set of lessons. Okay, that's enough for me. Still raining really heavily outside, so I'm not going to go out and go for a jog or play football or anything, as if I was going to do that anyway. I'm going to stay in and do some more programming. Good luck with all your materials, all your lessons, all your studies, and I'll see you for the next video where we're going to start looking at if and else if and else and different branching conditional statements that we can make. This is an S1 Perry production. Please like, please subscribe, click the little ringing bell thing if you really feel like it. Good night and good luck.